At precisely 9:45 a.m. on the 2nd of May 2026, a nondescript convoy of legal representatives representing the private estate of the Duke of Kent passed through the sovereign gates of Windsor Castle. They carried with them a series of binding, irrevocable deeds that would permanently alter the structural power balance at the apex of the British monarchy. This was not a routine administrative visit, nor was it a celebratory gathering for Princess Charlotte's 11th birthday, which occurred on the exact same day. Instead, it was the formal execution of a masterfully coordinated constitutional maneuver. The permanent, total transfer of the legendary Cambridge sapphire Peru to Catherine, Princess of Wales. The immediate public narrative will naturally focus on the sheer, breathtaking material wealth of the acquisition, a matching historic set featuring a magnificent tiara, a masterfully crafted necklace, several intricate brooches, and a pair of flawless earrings. However, forensic constitutional analysts look past the superficial glamour of royal pageantry to see this event for what it truly is. A devastating, multi-layered institutional defeat for Queen Consort Camilla, and the single biggest strategic victory for Princess Catherine since her entry into the House of Windsor. The true gravity of this transfer lies in the distinct legal architecture governing the Cambridge sapphires. These stones are not part of the state-owned crown jewels, nor are they held in an institutional trust for the nation. They are classified as absolute private property. Originating with Princess Augusta, the Duchess of Cambridge, in the early 19th century, they were later gifted by Queen Mary to the Duke of Kent's mother, Princess Marina, in 1934. Because they passed through a chain of personal, intrafamilial gifts, they completely bypassed the centralized royal collection system controlled directly by the reigning monarch. This means that King Charles III possessed zero statutory authority to veto the transaction, and Queen Camilla was entirely powerless to demand that the collection be surrendered to her personal patronage. The 90-year-old Duke of Kent operated not as a royal functionary managing state assets, but as a private citizen disposing of his own sovereign wealth. By executing this legal handover without seeking the permission of the sovereign or his consort, the Duke successfully outmaneuvered the traditional queue of royal hierarchy, placing a historic arsenal of jewelry directly into the hands of the future queen. To understand why this specific private transfer has caused such profound fury within the private apartments of Queen Camilla, one must examine the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of institutional scarcity that dictate the British peerage. In the highly sophisticated and ancient language of the British court, power is not measured merely by titles, but by the exclusive monopoly over visual heritage. For the past 3 years, Camilla's modern leverage within the royal family has been built upon her status as the solitary female anchor at the apex of the contemporary court. Her unprecedented access to the late Queen Elizabeth's personal vault gave her a temporary visual uniqueness that separated her rank from the junior members of the family. However, the transition into mid-2026 has brought a severe internal correction. The realization that Catherine now holds a magnificent, privately owned Romanov-descended sapphire set that can never be reclaimed by the crown completely shatters Camilla's ceremonial monopoly. The strategic timing of the transfer landing precisely on the heels of Catherine's historic appointment as an extra lady of the most ancient and most noble order of the Thistle signals a permanent shift in the family's center of gravity. In the unyielding framework of British royal dynamics, possession isn't just 9/10 of the law, it is the law itself. By locking away private assets outside the monarch's veto, the old guard is actively choosing who inherits the visual mandate of the state. This loss of visual exclusivity triggers a profound psychological and strategic crisis for the Queen Consort's camp, exposing an internal vulnerability known within palace corridors as the Dowager Queen Panic. Under British constitutional law, a Queen Consort's official status, funding, and administrative leverage are tied directly to the survival of her husband. The exact moment King Charles III concludes his reign, Camilla will instantly transition to the role of Dowager Queen, a position carrying zero sovereign authority, no automatic seat on the Privy Council, and absolutely no independent access to the massive cash flows generated by the Duchy of Lancaster. Having already lost the ability to extract permanent hard assets for her non-royal bloodline due to Prince William's previously issued sovereign decree of Duke exclusivity regarding the Duchy of Cornwall, Camilla understood that controlling the monarchy's symbolic visual landscape was her final weapon of political leverage. The Duke of Kent's decisive legal move effectively neutralizes that weapon, establishing an unassailable fortress of private wealth around Princess Catherine that cannot be touched by the shifting winds of palace politics. The underlying architectural conflict that culminated in the Windsor Castle handover was not an impulsive act of familial favoritism, but the calculated, military-grade execution of a long-term institutional strategy. To understand why the 90-year-old Duke of Kent, the longest-serving duke in British history, and one of only two members of the royal family to hold the supreme rank of Field Marshal in the British Army, chose to bypass his own direct heirs, one must look directly at his 80 years of unblemished service to the crown. The Duke's sons, George, Earl of St. Andrews, and Lord Nicholas Windsor, are non-working royals who have consciously carved out private lives away from the grueling demands of the sovereign apparatus. In the cold, pragmatic calculations of senior palace traditionalists, passing a historic, high-stakes jewelry collection to individuals outside the active machinery of the state is viewed as an institutional hazard. The Duke of Kent possessed first-hand, painful experience with the realities of estate dilution. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, under intense economic pressures and crushing inheritance tax burdens, the Kent family was forced to watch several priceless components of the original Cambridge sapphire set get sold off at Christie's auction house. For a man who inherited his dukedom at the age of 6 after his father perished in a tragic wartime aircraft crash in 1942, these family heirlooms were never mere personal accessories. They were historical tools of statecraft, specifically engineered to project the dignity and continuity of the United Kingdom on the global stage. The prospect of the remaining pieces being tucked away in a private bank vault, or worse, liquidated to settle future estate taxes by private citizens who cannot wear them to state banquets, was a failure the old Field Marshal refused to tolerate. According to highly sensitive leaks from within the Kent estate's legal team, the Duke explicitly stated during a closed briefing, "These stones were carved for public duty, not private safes. They belong exclusively to the individual who carries the historic weight of the future crown." This blunt institutional verdict was forged through a meticulous, 6-year operational assessment of Princess Catherine. In September 2020, the palace quietly orchestrated a highly significant transition, appointing Catherine as the joint president of the Scout Association to serve directly alongside the Duke of Kent, who had held the position solo since 1975. This was not a superficial, photo-op alliance. It was a prolonged, real-world testing ground where the elderly Duke observed Catherine's work ethic from a forensic distance. He witnessed a rare, invaluable quality that mirrored his own legendary career: a profound respect for the quiet, steady, and unglamorous mechanics of public service. In an era increasingly dominated by self-promotion and transactional celebrity, Catherine demonstrated an absolute willingness to show up for the crown regardless of whether the international cameras were rolling. She proved to the traditionalist Duke that she understood a fundamental law of Windsor survival. Service is not about the immediate applause, but about maintaining the structural integrity of the line of succession. The final catalyst that solidified the Duke's decision occurred during the somber days following the funeral of his beloved wife, the Duchess of Kent, in September 2025. Entering a deep period of personal reflection regarding the final disposition of his historical assets, the Duke initiated a series of highly restricted meetings with senior palace advisors. It was during this exact window that Catherine's global standing reached an unprecedented pinnacle. Her inclusion in the prestigious Time 100 health list in mid-2025, a direct acknowledgement of her transparent, extraordinarily dignified handling of her cancer treatment and subsequent recovery, had transformed her from a traditional royal figure into a universal symbol of human resilience. By the dawn of 2026, independent data analysts confirmed her public approval rating had reached an astronomical 90%. She had become, by every measurable metric, the ultimate moral asset of the House of Windsor. To a 90-year-old institutional guardian who had watched the rise and fall of various royal dynasties, this public mandate was the ultimate proof of eligibility. The Duke's internal logic was unyielding. Historic treasures of Romanov descent must be wielded by the person who holds the absolute heart of the populace. This multi-year vetting process culminated in a profoundly symbolic public moment on the 21st of April 2026, during a ceremony honoring the birthday of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Observers noted the elderly field marshal engaged in a lengthy, quiet conversation with the Princess of Wales. What the public viewed as a tender family exchange was, in reality, the silent passing of the torch. The legal framework had been locked. The military-grade precision of the Duke's estate planning had successfully outmaneuvered any potential efforts by the Queen Consort's office to absorb the sapphires into her central patronage. The stage was set for the ultimate visual unveiling. Beyond the cold mechanics of legal deeds and public approval percentages, the Duke of Kent's decisive handover of the Cambridge sapphire parure was guided by a profound sense of historical and linguistic symmetry. For over a decade following her marriage into the royal family, Princess Catherine carried the title of Duchess of Cambridge. To an uncompromising traditionalist like the Duke, the concept of these specific, legendary stones returning to an active, working Duchess of Cambridge who routinely performs the heavy lifting of the monarchy felt less like a standard inheritance and more like an act of historical restoration. The stones had spent nearly a century tied to the Kent branch, but their foundational identity belonged to the Cambridge lineage. By placing them back into the direct line of succession, the Duke was consciously closing a historical loop, ensuring that the visual capital of the past was being systematically reinvested into the primary engine of the future monarchy. This act of historical alignment stood in sharp contrast to the personal and religious paths chosen by the Duke's own children. His eldest son, George, Earl of St. Andrews, famously married a Roman Catholic, a decision that historically required him to temporarily surrender his place in the line of succession under the Act of Settlement before being reinstated decades later. His younger son, Lord Nicholas Windsor, took an even more definitive step by formally converting to Catholicism. While the Duke held absolute personal respect for his children's independent life choices, the rigid, traditional realities of the British monarchy are unyielding. The sovereign remains the supreme governor of the Church of England, and the supreme symbols of the crown's heritage are inextricably bound to the state religion and the public execution of constitutional duties. The Kent heirs are private citizens. They do not represent the king at lavish state banquets. They do not host visiting foreign heads of state, and they do not carry the diplomatic weight of the nation on their shoulders. To leave a collection of this magnitude in hands that are legally confined to private civilian life would be an institutional waste of visual power. The Duke understood that these sapphires required an active, public canvas, a stage that only the future queen could provide. A historic jewel is a dead object if kept locked in a private safe. It only activates as a symbol of national continuity when it catches the light at a state processional. This reality introduces a highly delicate, structural friction between the two most powerful women in the royal family today. As Queen Consort, Camilla naturally possesses the historic first right of refusal for the vast majority of the official crown jewels and the sprawling personal jewelry collection left behind by the late Queen Elizabeth II. Her access to the legendary central vaults of Buckingham Palace is mathematically unparalleled. Yet, there is a massive catch. Those items are held in trust for the institution of the monarchy itself. They do not belong to Camilla personally. She cannot sell them. She cannot alter them permanently without intense bureaucratic oversight, and she cannot independently dictate their long-term inheritance outside the established rules of the state. The Duke of Kent's private collection operates under a completely different, liberated set of legal rules. Because these sapphires are classified as private wealth, they bypass the traditional royal queue entirely. The Duke exercised his absolute legal right to look completely past the current occupant of the throne and place his treasures directly into the hands of the next generation. This creates a fascinating, unprecedented dynamic. While Camilla represents the present, acting as the steady, ceremonial hand at the side of King Charles III during a highly volatile period of transition, Catherine is aggressively building a personal arsenal of history that belongs to her alone. It is a structural reality that rapidly shifts the psychological center of gravity within the family. While the Queen holds the official crown, the princess has captured the definitive institutional momentum. The quiet precision of the Windsor Castle handover on the 2nd of May 2026 was not an isolated incident. Rather, it represents the latest tactical deployment by a formidable, unyielding institutional alliance that has effectively consolidated control behind palace walls. This strategic front, formed by the direct, legitimate bloodline heirs of the late Queen Elizabeth II, has systematically isolated the office of the Queen Consort, leaving Camilla and her private secretaries completely marginalized within the key decision-making chambers of the court. Far from a standard domestic disagreement over family heirlooms, the inner core of the dynasty has treated the final disposition of the Duke of Kent's private estate as a critical matter of long-term state stability, requiring swift and absolute executive execution. At the helm of this structural tightening is Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Operating with significantly expanded executive authority over the vast royal properties and backed by his absolute, undisputed control over the highly lucrative revenues of the Duchy of Cornwall, the future monarch has deployed his full strategic weight to shield the line of succession from external influence. For William, securing the Cambridge sapphire parure for his wife is not an exercise in vanity. It is a calculated, necessary consolidation of the sovereign axis that will define the next era of the British monarchy. By ensuring that these independent, historically significant assets are locked permanently into Catherine's custody, William is consciously building a defensive wall around his family's lineage, guaranteeing that their combined authority remains unassailable long before his eventual accession as King William V. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the Prince of Wales is Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the ultimate disciplinary force and the most fierce guardian of traditional boundaries within the royal household. Princess Anne's support for Catherine's acquisition of the Kent sapphires is absolute, rooted in her lifelong dedication to the strict, traditional rules of succession and her historical disdain for backdoor administrative manipulation. Having spent over 50 years maintaining the internal discipline of the monarchy, the Princess Royal possesses an unparalleled understanding of how symbolic objects dictate actual power dynamics within the court. Her deep-seated vigilance effectively neutralized any potential defensive maneuvers emerging from the Queen Consort's office. The distribution of royal assets must always align with the direct survival of the line of succession. To prioritize temporary comfort over permanent continuity is to compromise the architecture of the crown itself. According to high-level administrative leaks from within the senior royal council, Princess Anne directly intervened when Camilla's private secretaries attempted to raise procedural objections regarding the Duke of Kent's private estate planning. During a highly restrictive, closed-door meeting of the family's senior trustees, the Princess Royal reportedly dismantled the Queen Consort's arguments with clinical precision. Anne stated clearly that the institution requires a permanent, uncompromised commitment to the future line of the throne, rather than accommodating the immediate anxieties of a temporary administration. This decisive intervention from the Princess Royal effectively shut down Camilla's ability to mount a formal bureaucratic defense through the Central Palace committees, signaling to the wider civil service that the old guard had firmly aligned with William and Catherine. The total convergence of Prince William's financial leverage with Princess Anne's matching institutional authority has created a permanent correction of the internal royal landscape. By integrating Catherine into the elite circle of private, high-value asset holders, this bloodline alliance has established an irreversible precedent. The deliberate clinical coordination between the Prince of Wales, the Princess Royal, and the elderly Duke of Kent has sent a definitive message through every corridor of the civil service and the wider court. The brief period where the Queen Consort's office could influence the distribution of historic titles, public symbols, and sovereign assets is officially over. The legitimate heirs have successfully secured the gates of the empire, leaving Queen Camilla structurally isolated from the future governance of the realm. In the highly sophisticated, centuries-old lexicon of the British monarchy, public display is the ultimate forensic proof of actual executive power. Slogans and official press releases mean very little compared to the unyielding reality of who wears what behind the palace walls. The permanent transfer of the Cambridge sapphire parure reached its absolute visual and psychological climax on the morning of the 2nd of May 2026. At a private family gathering held within the secure perimeter of Windsor Castle to mark Princess Charlotte's 11th birthday, Catherine, Princess of Wales, made a quiet yet historically earth-shattering appearance. Pinned to her attire were not the standard, mass-produced accessories of contemporary high fashion, but the legendary diamond and sapphire girandole earrings from the original 1934 Cambridge set. These breathtaking pieces, once the pride and joy of the iconic Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent, had been thought by international jewelry historians to be permanently retired from public view, safely locked away behind the heavy vault doors of the Kent estate. Their sudden, flawless reappearance on Catherine's person on this exact date served as a definitive, unassailable signal to the global diplomatic corps and the domestic press alike. The Duke of Kent's most prized private assets had successfully transitioned to the next generation. This was no longer a matter of palace, rumor, or tactical legal speculation. It was a visible, undeniable physical fact. The choice to debut them specifically on Princess Charlotte's birthday was a masterstroke of long-term dynastic messaging, flashing a clear signal across the globe that the line of succession for these treasures now runs directly from mother to daughter. The true brilliance of this maneuver lies in the long game Catherine is actively playing. For the past several years, behind the scenes of her grueling public schedule, the Princess of Wales has been meticulously curating a highly exclusive, entirely private jewelry archive, intended solely for her daughter, Princess Charlotte. This collection stands completely independent of the official state vaults and the centralized Royal Collection Trust. Because these items are protected under the strict legal mechanisms of private royal estates, they are completely immune to the whims of whoever happens to be sitting on the throne or controlling the main palace keys at any given moment. They belong to Catherine, and one day they will belong entirely to Charlotte, creating an untouchable material foundation that cannot be touched by the shifting winds of future palace politics. To secure an independent archive of private wealth for a young princess is to guarantee her autonomy long before she ever steps into her adult constitutional duties. It removes her from the transactional mercy of the central court. A close family associate reportedly shared the underlying philosophy guiding Catherine's curation strategy, noting that the Princess of Wales possesses an acute understanding of how symbols dictate a woman's standing within the House of Windsor. By securing the Kent legacy now, she is actively eliminating future leverage points that could be used against her daughter by rival factions within the family. The immediate consequence of this visual coronation is the total neutralization of Queen Camilla's shadow administration. Throughout the first half of 2026, the contrast between the two most senior women in the royal family has become impossible to ignore. Every time Catherine steps into the public eye, wearing a piece of jewelry with a deep historical story, she strengthens her psychological bond with the global public and reinforces her standing as the true ambassador for the family's heritage. The sentiment circulating among senior palace observers has effectively crystallized into a single, devastating reality. The Queen has the official crown, but the princess has the absolute momentum. The centralization of these treasures under Catherine's custody ensures they will continue to shine at the most critical moments of national life, serving as an immutable bridge between the grandeur of the past and the 21st century reality of a modern, focused monarchy. The strategic convergence of Princess Catherine's double victories in mid-2026, the constitutional acquisition of the extra lady status within the Order of the Thistle and the absolute private legal transfer of the Cambridge Sapphire Parure marks the definitive conclusion of the Ruse Prophet internal palace realignment. What began as a series of defensive maneuvers within the private apartments of Queen Camilla has dissolved into a permanent institutional containment. The architectural defense engineered by the legitimate bloodline heirs has held completely firm. By utilizing the strict, unyielding framework of the sovereign prerogative alongside the ironclad protections of private estate law, King Charles III, Prince William, and Princess Anne have delivered an administrative masterpiece that leaves the office of the Queen Consort entirely powerless to launch a public counteroffensive or claim political victimization. To register a formal complaint against Catherine's dual elevations would force Camilla's private advisors to openly admit their own systemic failures. It would cast a harsh public spotlight on the reality that her office was caught attempting to bypass the standard auditing committees of the Duchy of Cornwall just weeks prior, trying to secure independent asset extractions for her non-royal lineage before Prince William clinically severed their access. The defensive perimeter constructed around the line of succession remains an indivisible trust designed solely to support the active heart of the working monarchy. For Camilla, the reality of this transition is as chilling as it is absolute. She successfully navigated the decades-long controversial journey to the title of Queen Consort, yet she faces the harsh reality that the true masters of the empire have already locked the vaults, reassigned the historic heirlooms, and secured the green velvet future of the dynasty for Queen Catherine. The profound long-term significance of this entire operation transcends temporary palace rivalries. It provides the final answer to the ultimate question of institutional continuity. Royal history is routinely told through the grand language of battles, statutes, and legislative decrees, but its actual, day-to-day endurance is maintained through these tangible links of gold, velvet, and precious stone. History is being etched directly into the Romanov diamonds and Cambridge sapphires worn by the woman who will one day stand at the sovereign axis of the realm. Catherine has not merely acquired a historic jewelry set or a magnificent ceremonial robe. She has successfully secured a future. She did it with the explicit blessing and legal backing of the one man whose immense private wealth and historic military rank gave him the independent authority to make it happen without asking anyone's permission. The Duke of Kent spent 80 years serving an institution that famously moves with extreme caution, but in his final major act of estate disposition, he moved with absolute, military-grade decisiveness. He looked directly at the family tree, evaluated who actually shows up for the quiet demands of the crown, measured who the public fundamentally trusts to carry the legacy forward, and placed his family's most treasured possessions into the safest possible hands. That is not the language of a casual family gift. That is a definitive, historic verdict, a verdict that will continue to echo through every state banquet, every international diplomatic reception, and every historic photograph for the next 50 years. As the legal documents remain securely filed within the private archives of Windsor Castle and the sapphire gerandal earrings catch the light of a new era, the modern trajectory of the House of Windsor stands permanently corrected. The temporary shadow administration of the Queen Consort has reached its definitive expiration date, leaving the active bloodline in total, unassailable control of the gates of the empire. The transition is complete, the vaults are locked, and the velvet future of the British monarchy belongs entirely to Catherine, Princess of Wales,